occupational injuries, and even job openings. It's data, she says, can be crucial to American businesses, workers, and policymakers. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
And speaking of government statistics, this week is going to be a doozy for those. We are going to get consumer confidence, GDP, inflation, and employment all coming this week, and we will have you covered for all of it. In New York, I'm Sabri Ben-Achour with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
Tidbits, family owned and operated since 1985, offers dine-in, catering, delivery, and takeout at Bay Meadows, Hendricks, and Mandarin locations. Menu items include fresh sandwiches, salads, and soups, open Monday through Saturday. Online ordering and menu at clarastidbits.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
What went so wrong at Douglas Anderson School of the Arts? We talk with the reporter behind an investigative series into why the school's sexual misconduct problems persisted for decades. Then, as Northeast Florida's housing crisis intensifies, one established housing nonprofit is rebranding and expanding. We welcome the organization's interim chief. And how can upstart podcasters partner with legacy media organizations? A podcast boot camp promises a chance to collaborate. Join the conversation. Give us a call on air at 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or tag us on Facebook, Instagram, or X at FCC On Air. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Nora Rahm. President Trump is meeting today with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at one of Trump's golf clubs in Scotland. Before going behind closed doors, both men agreed more must be done to relieve the suffering in Gaza. The World Food Program says about a third of the 2 million people there haven't eaten in days. Trump said the U.S. has provided aid, but other nations must step up.
The whole place is a mess. It'll get straightened out, but it's a mess. They have to get food and safety right now.
Israel is pausing fighting to allow aid into Gaza amidst an international outcry over worsening humanitarian conditions and starvation. NPR's Eleanor Beardsley reports the Israeli military took journalists into a sliver of the enclave to try to show their side of the story.
We rode over the Kerem Shalom crossing near Egypt in the back of military trucks. A place that once bustled with aid trucks appeared desolate. There was just desert, barbed wire fences, and searing heat. Sporadic gunfire and heavy artillery could be heard in the distance. We were shown a massive asphalt parking lot with thousands of tons of uncollected aid and told it was the fault of the UN. Brigadier General Effie Defrin says the Army is doing its job.
It's not fun being in Gaza, we understand that. But we are doing our best, being creative, to distribute food to the people of Gaza.
Contrary to aid agencies and NPR and others reporting on the ground, Defrin said there is no starvation in Gaza. He claimed most pictures showing starvation are Hamas propaganda fakes. Eleanor Beardsley, NPR News, Gaza.
The European Union's top leader says Ukraine must ensure the independence of anti-corruption agencies, following protests last week over a law that would have curbed those powers. NPR's Joanna Kakissis reports the EU said last week it would send nearly $2 billion in non-military aid to Ukraine that's tied to good governance.
Writing on social media, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said Ukraine had achieved a lot on its path as a candidate for EU membership. She wrote, "It must build on these solid foundations and preserve independent anti-corruption bodies, which are cornerstones of Ukraine's rule of law. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sparked rare wartime protests last week after he signed a law that would have put the country's anti-corruption agencies under the control of a pro-government prosecutor. After the protests, Zelensky introduced a second law restoring the independence of those agencies. Joanna Kakissis, NPR News.
At a summit in Malaysia today, Thailand and Cambodia agreed to an unconditional ceasefire. Fighting began along their disputed border last Thursday. At least 30 people have died since then. Hundreds of thousands have been displaced. This is NPR News in Washington.
Good morning. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. A community meeting to gather public input on planned improvements to Schindler Drive on Jacksonville's west side is set for tomorrow evening. The project is designed to improve safety and accessibility for drivers, bicyclists, and pedestrians along Schindler between Collins Road and 103rd Street. The meeting starts at 5:30 at Kirkwood Baptist Church on Argyle Forest Boulevard. A deal that would have built a new stadium for the Tampa Bay Rays in St. Petersburg is no more. Steve Newborn reports city council members there voted to terminate the plans.
The vote was a formality after the team decided in March not to move forward with the deal to build a new ballpark and development on the site of Tropicana Field. Councilmember Richie Floyd, who had consistently opposed the deal, said everything that happened justified his opposition all along.
What a gift that we were able to get to a point where the termination has a minimal impact on our city. Some of us found out who we were dealing with before we got too far down the line.
The city is now renovating Tropicana Field after Hurricane Milton shredded its Teflon dome. They're hoping to have the ballpark ready by opening day in April. The team is obligated to play in St. Pete through the end of the 2028 season. But a possible change in the team's ownership could extend that deadline.
It's reported that the franchise will be sold to a developer with Jacksonville ties. Dangerous heat today in Jacksonville and northeast Florida. It's going to feel as if it's 115 degrees in most spots.
PR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Capital One with the Capital One Saver Card. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. Details at CapitalOne.com. And the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a year-long investigation into a series of sexual misconduct scandals at the city's premier art school finds a chronic failure to protect students. It also found nearly twice as many problem teachers as previously reported. We talked to the reporter behind the new investigation. Later in the program, a new podcasting boot camp aims to help local creators connect with mainstream platforms to distribute their work. But first, my guest has spent more than a year trying to solve the question of what went so wrong at Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. Megan Mallicoat is Jacksonville Today's education reporter, and she joins me now to talk about what she learned. Welcome, Megan.
Good morning, Ann.
I'm glad to see you here, and I'm glad to see that this article that has been in the works for so long has started running today.
This is very exciting.
Yes, it is. You actually began working on this as far back as June of 2024, and you sort of wanted to find out the why behind what we were seeing at that point. It was kind of this flood of concerns, teacher removals, and complaints.
That's exactly right. Because after Jeffrey Clayton's arrest in 2023, it seemed to set off some sort of reckoning that there was a lot of teachers removed also for sexual misconduct allegations. And so at a certain point, I think the community just starts to wonder, what's going on. So that was the crux of our investigation.
Yeah. And so you, in the course of this investigation, reviewed tens of thousands of documents. You requested enormous amounts of public records. You did dozens of interviews with current and former Douglas Anderson staff and teachers and students.
That's right.
Importantly. And I guess, this is a 4-part series. Tell us a little bit about how you tackled what each segment was going to focus on and a little bit about what today's segment does focus on.
Okay. Well, today's segment focuses on the initial kind of flashpoint that put this in the conversation. So it's the Jeffrey Clayton story for the most part. With we tried to leave no stone unturned, so it's got all the details that we could possibly find in it, as far as what led up to his arrest, but the complaints that the school and district had received about Jeffrey Clayton for 20 years prior, and it moves on from there and then talks about the reporting process and what happened after the arrest. Um, Tomorrow's segment touches on the other teachers, that were removed for allegations of sexual misconduct. Some of them have been reported prior, but there's some more details in it, and some of them haven't been reported in the past. Then with Wednesday segment, we tried to address the question of why Douglas Anderson. Is it unique? How does it compare to other schools in the district and in the state? And then on Thursday, we will address the questions of how do we know it's not going to happen again?
So in this initial deep dive into Jeffrey Clayton, I think one thing that emerges as a theme throughout the series, which I've been fortunate enough to read all of, and which is a remarkable piece of work, is this pattern of informal discipline. And so you take the Jeffrey Clayton instance, we should say, he's now serving a prison term for inappropriate sexual contact with a student, but he had been the subject of years of complaints of inappropriate conduct and inappropriate contact with students. They had originated from other teachers, from parents, from people who had just been visiting the school, from students themselves, and it was a very clear pattern of conduct. What did you find about the way that how the school administrators handled those complaints against him?
Well, what was interesting to me when I started to go through all of these documents was that a picture emerged that seemed to imply that there was some sort of system of unofficial discipline. Now, we did talk with Principal Jackie Cornelius. Well, she didn't agree to an interview, but she did respond by email and she maintains that she did not keep an unofficial file of discipline about Clayton.
She was, we should say, the principal kind of for about a 20-year period, many of those years while Clayton was getting these complaints.
Correct. For the bulk of his years, it was 97 to 2017, I believe. And so, but when we look at this, we see that he had a relatively small number of official discipline within the district's, regular discipline system, compared to how many complaints that we've heard stories of students telling, or that we see email records of the district receiving. And so and I even talked with one person who was a former investigator at the district, and that person said that they knew they had a problem with Clayton, but one of the problems that they had in progressing him through this standard system of progressive discipline was that a lot of the discipline was not recorded in an official way that allowed them to use the system that their policies are based around.
And so a lot of public agencies have what you note is called progressive discipline. And basically that means that there's this system. So you have perhaps a verbal warning and then a written warning, and then, the opportunities for discipline once that record is established. And what you found in the case of Jeffrey Clayton was this pattern of either Post-it notes or handwritten notes that were outside of those formal channels, outside of the documentation that would be required to make it part of Clayton's official discipline record. And those numbers, as you found them written in other places, often just handwritten notes, were wildly different.
Wildly different. So there was I ran across actually in a different faculty member's file, his personnel file, that somebody else who had been accused of misconduct. I was reading through his file, and in there's a handwritten note that talks about Jeffrey Clayton having 17 incidents and 16 verbals, and then it had Jeffrey Clayton's name written next to it. So I don't know what that refers to. You can just take it at face value, and it reinforces the stories that I've heard about other forms of unofficial discipline or unofficial ways of recording these incidents.
And so I do want to get into a little bit more of kind of the breakdown of what you did find on Clayton, because some of it is so striking. I mean, you interviewed 5 students who told you that either they personally or an adult that they trusted had reported Jeffrey Clayton for sexual misconduct and inappropriate conduct. You found in his record, these notes in his annual evaluation suggesting he needed to maintain greater professional distance, that he was told specifically not to tell, girls that they were pretty. That came in after a complaint where a parent volunteer said he was telling girls they looked hot.
Mhm.
Um, need to improve his professional behaviors, citing similar complaints. But this is all happening over a pattern of years, and something really significant happened in 2020.
That's right. In 2020, if you'll think back to just what was going on in American culture at the time, right? It's the summer of 2020, and everybody is at home on the internet because of COVID. So the discussion happens then with after George Floyd's death, the Black Lives Matter movement kind of shoots up, and the also the hashtag Me Too movement is also in full swing at that point. And so the community here in Jacksonville also starts having a conversation about Douglas Anderson. And at first, it was stories of students' perceived racism, and then stories of sexual misconduct by teachers also started to come in through these social media channels and the conversations that were happening at that time. And so through my research, see that as a like a flashpoint for when the conversation started to change from, all these complaints were being um, routinely, registered, but there's no evidence of anything happening, to all of a sudden then after the summer of 2020, then you start to see some movement in the direction that ultimately led in 2023 to Clayton's arrest and then subsequent conversations that we've had about additional teachers as well.
And there was, in particular, one former student who made it a point to meet with the school's principal in 2020, Jade Collins, and basically wanted to just let her know, like, this conversation is happening on social media. It's everywhere.
Right.
Students are talking about, they're naming teachers by name. They're talking about their experiences. And basically, you need to be aware of it.
Right, right. And of course, it was a Zoom conversation because it was 2020, the summer of. But she met with her. And looking at that, then from now, you can see movement happening in the direction. In fact, I spoke with another source, Shyla Jenkins, who said that she really also believes that that was kind of the moment that it changed. And Jade's commitment to telling these stories and getting the word out there was kind of the first sign that something needed to happen. That Douglas Anderson has such a wonderful reputation, and well deserved, let me say, as far as the students' achievements go. The students do amazing creative work, and it's just incredible to watch the things that they're able to do at such a young age. But that reputation also came with this other hidden side. And so Shyla's point and the work that Jade did kind of speaks to the idea that in the summer of 2020, the community realized that that comes at a cost.
A couple other things happened that same year in 2020, including what has kind of colloquially, at least in your reporting, known as the list.
The list, yes.
So a list was sent to the same principal, Melanie Hammer, and it basically laid out the names of people that were. Well, explain to us what the note said with the list.
Okay. This was an email that was received first by a former student to Melanie Hammer in the summer of 2020 again. And he was basically pleading with her to take these concerns seriously. That his letter said it's not just Jeffrey Clayton. It's not just fill in the blank, whoever is popular at the time. But here's a list of, I don't know how you want to phrase it. You know what the list is as well, but they all harm children. But
Right.
that's not the word that they used.
Right.
And then 12 different names followed. And so we will be talking about the list in tomorrow's story also. And it lays out a pretty clear picture, too, of the opportunities that the district had to act. So Principal Hammer forwarded this email to her direct supervisor at the time, Scott Schneider, and asked
And
what
he
she
was
needed to
a
do.
regional
He was the
superintendent.
regional superintendent at the time, and asked basically, what do I need to do with this? Do I need to send it to JSO? Do I need to send it to DCF, the Department of Children and Families? And then she named off some other people that she could think of sending it to, and the email records that we received show that he told her, you have done what is needed. And I can't find any other records of that having gone anywhere. and Mr. Schneider declined an interview, citing legal concerns.
But you did request all of his email. There was no indication that he forwarded that he sent it to anybody, or and there's no record of that list showing up anywhere else in school records that you requested. So it's not like it was distributed, as far as you can tell.
Correct. I really spent, honestly, a legitimate couple of months trying to track down anything and any possibility of where this might have gone, and I see nothing.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Megan Mallicoat. She is a reporter who has handled a year-long investigation into what happened at Douglas Anderson and why. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Of course, you can read the article, the first in this four-part series today on Jacksonville Today. We've got a call from Shyla Jenkins. Good morning, Shyla. Go ahead.
Good morning. I just want to say thank you again to Megan, and the article I read is phenomenal, and it's a tribute to her work and how many of us she met with to bring this story to life. And what I would say about this series, it definitely, as readers, look through this and your listeners are listening to this today, is to ask themselves, really implore, the people, the bad actors were taken out of the classroom eventually, but that the accountability to the administrators who were there who knew, to the district officials that we've already mentioned in some of the conversation this morning, have yet to be held accountable. There's really this question from alumni and from parents and from teachers who did the right thing. And Megan's articles really, I think, shine a light on that, and how they, did everything they needed to do to get this right. And it was for decades kind of left in the dark. So I would just implore your listeners to keep asking that question as it comes to light to how this happens at a school.
Thanks, Shyla. And we should note that Shyla herself is a former student. She is quoted in some of your reporting, Megan.
She's
and has
become a wonderful advocate for change at the school and for the students at Douglas Anderson.
Right. I mean, she emerged as kind of one of those voices at school board meetings, really raising the alarm and, calling for change there. To her point, in terms of people who did what they should do, something else happened in the year 2020, and that was Becky Lohr. She was a former teacher. She didn't teach at Douglas Anderson in 2020, but she, in that same time frame, decided that she really wanted to try to once again raise the alarm about Jeffrey Clayton, something that she had tried many, many times before to do.
That's right. It was actually her third official big push to get something done, although she has probably, it's impossible to count how many prior to that. But I could talk about Becky Lohr all day, because she is one of those people that when you think about what a teacher should be, that's Becky Lohr. And so when I spoke with other sources who had her as a teacher, their faces still break into these big grins, and they say, "Oh, I love Mrs. Lohr." Dr. Lohr now, she's gone on and got a doctorate, but she was a vocal teacher with Clayton in the department there, and so she had kind of a very front row seat to some of this things, and she describes seeing him touch students inappropriately, push his body into theirs, or Clayton was pretty widely known for putting his hand on female students' chests in a way that he shouldn't have, under the guise of breathing exercises or breathing instruction. And so she remembers seeing that and intervening and talking with students and reporting him to several different administrators, and even at the school level and at the district level, and still nothing happened. And so she documented it with district level officials through a letter that she wrote I hope I don't get my dates wrong off the top of my head, but I believe it was 2011, 2012 that she first submitted that. And there's no record in the district's records of them having kept it and received it. Although I did find records and was able to review some text messages saying that the principal at the time, Jackie Cornelius, had reviewed the letter. So I see hints of it, but I don't see the letter itself sitting in the files. Then she did it again a couple of years later. They came back. Clayton had been under investigation for something else, although for that particular incident, the what else is not clear because it's not listed in what the allegations were. So she submitted the letter again then. And then in 2020, when all this conversation arises, by then she's moved on. She no longer teaches at Douglas Anderson. She's been gone for, I guess, about 8 years at that point. And so she had a friend say, "Hey, this is the time you could, say something." And she's like, "What could I say? I've been saying this, and her
Kind of like, what more can
yeah,
I
what more
do?
can I do? Basically, and she sent it again, and this time she sent it as a like an email attachment directly to Diana Green, who was by then the superintendent. And we can see in the email records that Dr. Green received the letter, immediately sent it out to staff members to investigate. But it's not clear what happened from there regarding that specific letter. So
Yeah, and so even in that one instance, I mean, you find that Becky is one of at least 5 teachers who reported
Mhm,
Clayton, which is
mhm.
these are his colleagues witnessing things themselves, hearing concerns from students. Um, and even as she is documenting, in 2011 or, again in 2020, when she's putting things in writing and sending them to the appropriate people, your records requests show that they're not getting anywhere. They're not moving to anybody who's doing, or at least there's no clear investigative results.
Right, and potentially, to add insult to injury, not only did their reports not go anywhere, they also then faced a lot of retaliation from Clayton. And so I heard this from Becky Lore, and I heard it from just uh, every other faculty, every other like colleague of his that I spoke with, that after they would intervene or say something or push back on some behavior of his, then they were met with this kind of retaliative behavior from Clayton. So in Becky Lore's case, it was a like hostile work environment that he became very difficult to work with, and in a number of ways. And that story repeats itself again for other colleagues that he worked with, and it's uh,
I mean, students too
students too. That's right. That's
said
right.
that, if they expressed any concern or pushed back at all in his conduct, and students, as we know, in an arts program, we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, but, they're dependent on that instructor for whether they're getting a assignments or a lead, a solo or a role in a play or whatever it is. They're dependent on those teachers to kind of
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes Douglas Anderson a uniquely complicated situation. And we get into this in some of the later parts of the series, but at Douglas Anderson, that's exactly correct. That these are in many cases students who hope to have careers in the creative industries, and you need people to open doors for you, right? And so the students see their teachers as those people that can open doors. In many cases, the teachers themselves had once worked in those industries, or at least they had connections because of their time instructing. And so students were very reluctant to want to do anything that could have hindered them from getting those introductions to what they saw as the tickets to the rest of their careers.
We've got a call from Eric on the South Side. Good morning, Eric. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ann, and thanks to you for all your good work. It's very important.
Thank you.
I was a substitute teacher in the early 2000s and a book vendor to Douglas Anderson and spent some numerous hours there, and I didn't catch the name of the longtime principal that you mentioned.
Jackie Cornelius was there for 20 years.
Yes, well, I was shocked. I would be at break time between classes, and Principal Cornelius is there, and I would see prolonged, extended hugging and cheek kissing among students right in front of her. And I thought, what is this all about? And are you aware that there was a serious sexual incident in the early 2000s in one of the bathrooms over there at Douglas Anderson? Do you recall that?
We've come across a lot of things that have come up, and we haven't reported all of these things because, of course, there's legal ramifications to talking about different incidents. But we certainly have come across way more stories than what we've included in the stories.
Sure. And we should say, we mentioned earlier this list that was sent to the district in 2020, and also because it makes allegations that are not proven or perhaps were never even officially alleged. You're not naming those people other than to say they're all gone.
Right. Right. That's the
and most of them left under either a cloud of suspicion or perhaps were removed.
That's right. That's right. So I think what the student was hoping when he wrote the letter was simply that the district would investigate, to see if there was a problem there that needed to be remedied. And so that didn't happen. But over the course, some of them had already left, and some of them left since the letter, and a majority of them under clouds of suspicion. Yes.
You did, in the course of looking at, all of these cases, you identify a number of teachers that previously have not been publicly reported. So this cohort some of whom were on the list, but you basically found altogether between the current ones that were removed sort of post Jeffrey Clayton and the ones that preceded him for the previous 20 years prior to that, you found about 13 altogether.
At least 13 is what I would say, because there was this, we've talked at the beginning about how unofficial discipline seemed to be a system that they would go to. And so you can't always tell when a faculty member leaves if they left because of these reasons or because of other reasons. And so there are at least a total of 13 and quite possibly more.
Yeah. We've got a call from Mark in Jacksonville. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Couple of quick questions. All you ever hear about in Jacksonville, Duval County, is Douglas Anderson. And, we got, 30, 40, 50 high schools in the county. Have they been having similar sort of problems? Are we just not hearing about it or not? And also I'd like to know, there's all kinds of these famed kind of high schools, for the performing arts scattered throughout the country. Do they seem to have elevated risks of this kind of sexual behavior amongst teachers and students, or are we just an outlier?
Mark, I love that you asked that question because, of course, Megan, being the intrepid reporter that she is, asked and tried to find answers to those very same questions. So let's start with his first question, is kind of in the universe of Duval County schools. Is Douglas Anderson an outlier? You did try to get at that.
That's right. And so one of the reasons I think why we always hear about Douglas Anderson in Duval County is because Douglas Anderson is a fantastic school by many, many metrics. So if you look at Douglas Anderson's academics, it's one of the leading high schools in the district. Arts or not, I mean, it's just academically, it's right up there with some of the schools that you would assume should be up there, like Stanton or something like that. 100% of its students graduated this year and many years prior. Its students go on to earn millions of dollars in scholarships. I mean, it's a fantastic academic school. So that, I think, is one of the reasons, because it is one of the district's flagship schools. Of course, there's also other reasons why we commonly hear about Douglas Anderson in recent years that are less suited for the marketing brochure, perhaps. But in that regard, no, Douglas Anderson doesn't seem to really stand out from the pack from what I have been able to determine. But there is a lot of missing data. So I would say no with an asterisk, because it's unclear, because the data is not a complete data set. So I was able to receive from the district several different documents that helped me to piece together a list of all of the district-wide investigations for misconduct of all kinds. It's not just sexual misconduct. I mean, there's lots of reasons why you might open an investigation on an employee. But that it's not a complete data set, because recent reports have the district investigating something like about 400 cases a year, and the numbers that I've been able to gather just aren't up to that point, and we haven't gotten clarification from the district yet. But the other thing that makes Douglas Anderson stand out from the crowd in this and be a little bit different is that what we just spoke about, where students are very keen on getting these recommendations from faculty members, and so they handle the situations a little bit differently, perhaps. The school is also, a lot of people would point to the need for the school's reputation to stay intact. And so you see some cases where other schools maybe had one of these cases come up, took care of it, it's gone, you don't really hear about it. Because the act of sexual misconduct in the school isn't in and of itself huge news to me as a reporter, because unfortunately it does happen. It shouldn't, and my heart breaks for the students who are victims of that kind of conduct. Absolutely should not happen, but it does, just statistically, right? What makes it news is the district not handling it properly, or the school not handling it properly. And that's what we've tried to focus on in the story, is that the fact that it happened, well, statistically, you're going to expect it to happen at every school, unfortunately. But you need to take care of it properly so that it doesn't become a place where it can happen again and again and again. And to answer your question, Mark, about does it happen at other art schools? Yes, actually it does. In fact, there's a school in Baltimore that served as kind of a model school for Douglas Anderson back in the 80s when it was first converted to an arts magnet school. And it, around the same time period in that summer of 2020 or shortly thereafter, also went through this kind of big social media spurned uprising, where then their district also had to take a fair number of corrective measures and policy changes and so forth.
We should say, you compiled this, master spreadsheet trying to assess things like how many complaints were levied against teachers at Douglas Anderson, how they compared to other schools. And so, in the course of doing all that, I mean, you were finding major discrepancies. For instance, Clayton only is listed twice on this master list, even though he was investigated 8 times, officially investigated 8 times, right? And those are not the post-it notes; those are the ones that are actually documented properly. But all of this is happening in a district where we know, first of all, there was almost criminal charges that came from a grand jury report that found the district deliberately underreported criminal activity or crimes on campus at schools, and subsequently was cited, by the state or sanctioned by the state for failing to send timely these discipline reports. And so there is a long history in this district of failing to properly account for and properly report acts of violence, acts of criminal activity.
That's right. So there are several different ways that a crime on campus would end up being reported through the procedures that exist right now. One of the methods is what's commonly referred to as assessor reports. There's some longer acronym, but it's assessor reports, and that goes to the state mostly as just a tally. That doesn't typically go with identifiable information, and it doesn't lead to another like police investigation or anything. But it should show up in a tally of like a categorical tally of crimes on campuses or on school properties. Um, and so, if you'll remember, after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting in 2018, the state took a couple of different steps to investigate that as well as to how that was able to happen. And the assessor reporting statewide was one of the things that was looked into with a microscope at that point. And Duval was found to be incorrectly filing assessor reports for sure. And in 2019, the district freely admitted to the state itself that it had found that it had not reported, I think it was about 2,000 cases at the time, that it should have reported. And at that time, it changed its policies. And then when the Douglas Anderson, when Clayton's arrest happened, then that also shone a light on the way that the district sends misconduct reports, which is a different type of reporting to the state. And that's the type of report that would then have identifiable information and might eventually, if the employee is a teacher, might lead to their license being revoked. And so after Clayton was arrested, they were found to have not sent, it was a lot of reports. It ended up being about 70 some odd reports that they should have sent, and they didn't. So yes, it's a long history, but I also in my research see movement in the right direction in the recent years. So.
They have changed the policies there specifically. Well, district-wide, they've changed the policies at Douglas Anderson in terms of, student conduct. They've limited the kind of interaction a teacher can have. And it's important, too. They've changed how teachers can communicate with students. And, that now has to go through official channels. One of the things that your reporting uncovered, which was just astounding, was a teacher who ultimately was removed and I believe later arrested for other acts, but had been sending messages to a student through the Grinder app, and in the middle of the night had previously been reported with a different student texting him in the middle of the night.
That's right. He's not been arrested.
Okay.
But there is a pre-suit notice that the district has received for litigation towards that case. But yes, that's employees are now required to contact students only through the district's official channels, which my understanding of that right now is that it's the Microsoft product that they use through the district's online systems.
And now it's only high fives, handshakes, fist bumps. You're not allowed to hug or press against a student or touch their chests or anything like that.
That's right. And of course, there are exceptions in the case of special ed students, perhaps, or emergencies and things like that. But generally, the district has made it clear that the only acceptable type of contact is a high five, a handshake, or a fist bump.
One thing that, and just in the scope of your reporting, we should say, I mean, you obviously went through all of these documents. You created, your own spreadsheets to try to, consolidate some of this information, make it digestible. You also went back and read a memoir from one of not the founding principal, but Jane Condon, clearly a big name associated with the early days of that school, building up its reputation. But it was a curious anecdote that you found in her memoir, and maybe it speaks a little bit to just the culture of, running an art school and also trying to not perhaps get teachers flagged for trouble.
That's right. So the anecdote is a story that she told of something that happened very early on in Douglas Anderson's time as a magnet school and in her time there, which was that uh, something happened where a teacher put I think at the time it was a VHS tape into a VCR in the classroom to show what he thought was going to be a lesson on like painting, but it turned out to feature 5 naked students instead. And so, in digging into how this happened, Principal Condon found that it was like a prank that the students had played, right? And so, the teacher who had been supervising them, or was supposed to be supervising them, hadn't noticed that this had happened, and
It happened on campus.
it happened on campus. That's right. And so, Condon describes thinking of it as a mistake and not feeling like the teacher or herself should lose their jobs over it, but feeling like that was a risk, right? And so she went to the district level HR and asked for help in how to keep this incident off the books. And she describes in her memoir this like discussion that she had with the HR about what she could do to keep it off the books. And so she decided that she would fill out one of the standard forms that I guess she was thinking should have been reported or should have been used to report the incident. But instead of turning it in, kept it in her files. She showed it to the teacher. She kept it to the files. And so the HR person, in her book, she records the HR person as having told her, we'll make sure that there's only one copy of it because if it gets out, we're going to have to take action. We'll have to actually process it. But
The idea was if no parent complains, it'll just sit in my desk. But if we do get a complaint, I'll have this report. We'll put it on file.
that's right. That's right. And so she talks about how no parent did complain, and by the end of the year, she said, "Done. Okay, we'll throw it away. Situation contained," was her word.
Situation contained. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously that is an anecdote that she chose to share, presumably not considering that problematic. But I wonder if just in the grand scheme of things, now that you've done all the reporting, if that in any way speaks to you, just in terms of whether it was the informal discipline that you discovered or perhaps just a culture of accommodation.
Yeah, it's the informal discipline that stood out to me because it just it really it makes me think of the stories of informal discipline that we've heard in years later. And Douglas Anderson is the kind of school where um, the principals have led one into another, and it's this very connected culture that they've all worked together. So it's until the current principal had all just one kind of led to another. So you can see how a culture might be maintained throughout the decades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is one story in a magnificent 4-part series. It starts today. You can subscribe to jacksonvilletoday.org, and then you'll be able to see the rest of the series as well. Megan, thanks for your work on this. Thanks so much for coming on today to talk about it.
Sure. Thanks, Ann.
All right. Up next, Habijax gets a new name, a new leader, and a new set of responsibilities. Welcome back. As Northeast Florida's housing crisis intensifies, one local nonprofit is rebranding and expanding. Here to talk about it is Chris Ford. He's the interim CEO with First Coast Habitat for Humanity, previously Habijax. Hey, Chris.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, the name and the scope of the organization are changing. What is the inspiration behind this new move?
Well, we've our Jacksonville affiliates had a lot of success over the years. Since 1988. We've built over 2,400 houses. There was an affiliate in Nassau County that had a lot of success, and we recognized that the need across our entire community is unfortunately very, very great. And we felt like we could make more of an impact by combining our resources, and we can deliver our product at a greater scale across the entire region, together more than separately.
Yeah, and so whereas Habijax was primarily focused on Jacksonville and Duval County, now you've expanded to Nassau and Baker counties.
That's right.
And I'm curious how you made the decision about kind of where to go and where to expand into, because obviously Clay's right next door, St. Johns County's right to the south. How did you decide what counties to partner with?
So it's interesting. So Baker County, there's never been a Habitat for Humanity affiliate serving Baker County before, and there is a real need over there. We had a town hall meeting over there about this very thing, and we were shocked at how great the turnout was and how eager people were to have this service there. So that was part of what drove the decision around Baker. Nassau, again, the affiliate that was there, the Habitat affiliate, Nassau County Habitat, had a lot of success serving, as they call it up there, the island, out near the ocean and Fernandina Beach area. But there was a real desire and felt like they could scale up if we could get into the western parts of the county where there's more land and it's growing a lot. And
Sure.
so that's what really drove that. And then there are other pretty successful Habitat affiliates in Clay and St. John's and at the beaches. So they're doing their thing, and we've got our new sort of First Coast affiliate with those three counties.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people know the Habitat for Humanity brand as kind of something that involves sweat equity. People would, help build and then occupy these homes. And people who've been around here for a while will well remember, Jimmy Carter
Oh,
coming
yeah.
down and with a hammer and building 100 homes in a scant number of days. I don't remember quite. But is that still the model? I mean, is that still how Habitat approaches it, trying to get people who are interested in home ownership to be a part of the kind of the ground up?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the sweat equity thing's kind of built into our DNA. I will tell you, we think kind of right sized it. It was for a long time. It was if you were going to buy a house with Habijax at the time, it was 300 hours of sweat equity, which is a lot of time to spend on the construction site. So we've shrunk that down a little bit. A lot of our clients are working 1-2 jobs. They have families, and we don't want it to be a onerous burden or something. We do feel like it's important to kind of get out there and have that skin in the game, so to speak.
Mhm.
And there's a value too in that people can come out and they're sort of learning home maintenance too, because they're
Yeah.
out on the site working on their own home. And it's really cool for our supporters to, when they come out to volunteer, our sponsors, our regular volunteers, to interact and see the people that are going to be living in these homes that they're volunteering on.
Yeah. Oh, to your point, I'm guessing there are a lot of people, though, who, like you say, are working multiple jobs. What is the need that you see in the community when it comes to the price of homes, the availability of homes? What is what's the greatest difficulty that you see?
For people, I mean, we have clients that are spending amounts of money on rent, given what they make, that I is just incredibly onerous. Cost burdened is when somebody spends more than 30% of their monthly income on their housing. And there are people in this community working jobs that we really, really need in our community that are spending 50-60% of their income on housing. I mean, and it makes it just impossible to pursue other really key quality of life areas. It's like if you're spending 60% of your monthly income on housing and you get up in the morning and something hurts, you might skip going to the doctor. If you've got 2 options for childcare, you're probably going to have to choose the cheaper one, not necessarily the one you really want for your child. So it's finding a way to keep that monthly number workable for people, I think, is the real challenge. And if we can do that, it is truly catalytic.
So how is your model able to keep home prices within the range of affordability for people so that they're not acquiring a home that leaves them cost burdened?
That's right. Yeah. So our rule is that somebody's payment has to be 30% or below, and the way we do that is several fold. So we help with down payment assistance. We build a product at a lower price point. So that a lot of normal builders aren't able to do. We do.
Why aren't they able to? I mean, when you say not able?
Well, I think that it's the difference between a $250,000-$260,000 house versus us, who's building houses between $180,000 and $200,000. We're not trying to make a profit. So we're a nonprofit, so that's a big part of it. One of the biggest tools we have is that we work with certain credit unions and lenders around town to help us do our mortgages, and we either with our partners or First Coast Habitat, still getting used to the new name,
Right.
will basically buy down an interest rate so that if someone is buying a house with us, they're going to have an interest rate that's about 2 percentage points below
Wow.
what you'd be able to get elsewhere. And it all adds up to, we have enough levers like you were asking where we can make sure that that payment stays below that 30% threshold.
And I know that you've set some aggressive goals for the organization, and you've built, 2,400 homes over the years that Habijax has been in this community. But even with that, it's less than 100, fewer than 100 a year, right? What would be a pace that can keep pace with the need that you see? What goals are you setting?
Boy, that's a good question. I mean, I think that to really make an impact, we need to scale up across the multiple counties. And housing is a continuum, right? Like we're sort of on the end with the home ownership piece, but there's rental housing, there's transitional housing, and to really meet the need, we can scale up, but it's going to, sounds hokey, but it's going to take all of us to, sort of work that whole continuum. So, I mean, we're building the last few years, we've closed between 25 and 35 houses. I'd like to see us get up in like the top 5 of the country in terms of, houses closed with families. So, but we've got to have some meaningful discussions with that internally as an organization and with other partners, in the community that work on housing to find out like, well, how do we link arms and cohesively address this across this whole continuum? Because I'm sure you saw, there's a UNF poll that just came out that, housing was the number one issue that Duval County voters were concerned about ahead of even crime, which, I mean, even
Yeah.
as someone that works in this field was like,
Right.
whoa, man.
We're going to have to leave it there. Chris Foltz, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Certainly. Thank you for having me.
All right, up next, a podcast boot camp. We'll tell you about it.
This is it, the greatest concert film ever made. Join us Wednesday, August 20th at WJCT Studios for The Last Waltz, Martin Scorsese's legendary farewell to the band featuring Dylan, Clapton, Joni Mitchell, Van Morrison, and more. Doors open at 6:30, film rolls at 7. We've got a cash bar, popcorn, and nothing but good vibes. Grab your tickets now at wjct.org/film. One night, one stage. Don't miss The Last Waltz.
Band's final concert.
On the next Fresh Air, Mariska Hargitay, best known as Olivia Benson on Law & Order SVU, talks about a different kind of role, being a daughter. In her new documentary, My Mom Jane, she explores the life of her late mother, Jane Mansfield, and uncovers long-buried family truths. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
100 years ago, a small town in Tennessee became the stage for an historic legal battle. The Scopes monkey trial pitted science against scripture, a rift still relevant in debates over the role of religion in public schools.
History doesn't repeat itself because it's not identical, but it rhymes. It echoes.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. The impact of the Scopes trial a century later. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Whistleblowers play an important role in our democracy, but protections for them are getting weaker. The Trump administration is cracking down on those who speak out from within the government and the journalists telling their stories. How whistleblowing is changing under Trump. That's next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, as the popularity of podcasts surge and the audience for some legacy media outlets wanes, the space for partnership between the two is both promising and varied. Here to tell us about some of those opportunities, we are talking to Badr Milligan, co-founder of Jax Podcasters United. Good morning, Badr.
Hey, good morning.
Also, Blythe Milligan, the other co-founder of Jax Podcasters United. Good morning, Blythe.
Thank you for having us.
And we're joined by Letitia Barriola. She is director of podcasting here at WJCT Public Media. Hi, Letitia.
Hi, Ann.
Nice to share a mic with you here. So we know that there are people under 34 are consuming podcasts at a huge rate. About 66% of them listening to one at least once a month. And, that's a valuable audience for traditional media. Can you talk a little bit about how you're structuring this podcast boot camp around the idea of, finding a partnership space there?
Sure. So it really is a half day workshop for both new podcasters and veteran podcasters alike. For a lot of podcasters, it can be lonely at times creating shows. And so we really create these events to facilitate those in person conversations. But then some are still left wondering, what does that next step look like? What does instant credibility look like? And what does, increased audience size look like? And that's really forming those partnerships with local media as well as podcasters. And so then that way they can kind of feed off of each other and be that resource to local media and vice versa, and really gain that credibility aspect and notoriety.
And you and Badr are both podcasters. You do multiple podcasts even, but how have the lessons that you've learned doing what you do? How do you kind of communicate those? What are some of the big ones that you like to let people know about?
We typically get the biggest questions are around marketing and making money, because for a lot of shows, I think more than 90% of all shows never make it past 10 episodes. And so for a lot of folks, they're wondering, how do I get more than my grandma to listen to a show? How do I, just direct audience members? How do I gain more audience and then thus make money off of that show? And so those are we kind of try to help folks cut to the chase with the lessons that we've learned and what kind of revenue models work for what audience size. And the answer is different for every show. I come from a sports and entertainment background, but I didn't really make a whole heck of a lot of money podcasting in that realm because there's so much supply. Now, on the flip side, on the logistics side of things, I have a logistics focused podcast, and that audience is naturally smaller, but the level of the executive that's listening to a show like that is going to spend a little bit more. And so helping the audience or helping other podcasters understand the differences between what that download or what that view means for their show. And it could be different depending on the market that you're in.
Letitia, I want to ask you about kind of what WJCT's interest is in this. You are director of podcasting. You've been really stepping up the station's podcasting game. There's a new studio here that is beautiful and has all the bells and whistles that people can use. But what do you see as a partnership between kind of this disparate community of podcasters and what the station here is focused on?
Yeah, so I have been here as director of podcasting for about a year now. And one of the first things I wanted to tackle was sort of the gap between WJCT Public Media and this creative audio video now podcasting community, because we are a legacy station. We are the experts in broadcast and audio. And I wanted to reach out and say, how can we collaborate? How can we support what you're doing as a community, public media station? And so obviously Badr and Blythe were my first people to they are the leaders in this community. And out of this relationship between us, the first sort of request was, what do you think about hosting this workshop? And so the idea is that they get to see WJCT in a new light. Hundreds of people are in this building all the time, right, for events. And so now I want them to see us as we can also be a resource for your podcast needs, whether it's our podcast services, our podcast studio, we do consulting, we do full-blown production for people, and really just be like, how can we help our community more? That's what we're here for.
Yeah. Badr, what do you think? I know that this podcast boot camp appeals to novices and people with more experience alike. You've kind of got a couple of tracks, but is this for people who are interested in platforming podcasts as well, or is it mostly for people producing podcasts?
I think it's a good combination of both, but it definitely leans towards the practitioners, right? The folks that are putting out a show, maybe aspiring to put out a podcast, start their own, but also the intermediates, the folks that have been doing it maybe for 2 to 5 years, that are looking to level up their game, whether that be, how do I reach more people? How do I get more downloads? All right, where do I go from here? I've got 50 episodes in the can. I want to start making, some money. I want to start, exploring different opportunities, all the way up to the seasoned folks as well. And I think that's one thing that we enjoy about the JPU is just the range of talent that we have, from the different type of podcast creators that dabble in, whether it be sports or different genres, to podcast services and businesses that are that we count among our podcast community. We were having a conversation before we got started that it just makes so much sense that something like the Jax Podcasters United group is here in Jax, considering just the amount of talented podcasters, the different podcast businesses and services. And I think that's our goal with the podcast camp, is to bring all of that together underneath one roof and share resources and education, whether, regarding, whether your status of, a newbie aspiring season.
Right. Well, the event is Thursday. It's 1 to 5 p.m. It's here at WJCT Studios, free parking, just RSVP. You can go to jackspodcastersunited.com. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for listening. Please join us tomorrow when we explore whether the abuse endured at the notorious Dozier School played a role in landing 34 former students on Florida's death row. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, finding the who, what, when, where, why, and how that led to the accident is critical to proving the truth.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
This is WJCT News